Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever feel like you are constantly trying to be perfect, and it is just making you miserable? Well, this new study dives deep into why that might be happening, especially when big life tests are on the line. So, what exactly is perfectionism? It is not just about having high standards, it is about setting super high personal goals, and also being really worried about what others think, especially when it comes to criticism or negative feedback. We often hear that perfectionism is bad for our mental health, leading to more stress, anxiety, and even depression. But it is a bit more complicated than that. Psychologists have found that there are different kinds of perfectionism. One type is about setting personal standards, like wanting to do your best and achieve goals. This is often called personal standards perfectionism, or PSP. Then there is evaluative concerns perfectionism, or ECP. This is where you are really worried about making mistakes and what others will think of you if you don't measure up. Now, a cool idea called the 2x2M model of perfectionism suggests that it is not just one or the other, but how these two types of perfectionism mix and match that really matters. It creates 4 different groups of people: those who are not perfectionists, those who only have PSP, those who only have ECP, and those who have both. This study wanted to see how these different types of perfectionism affect people who are facing a really high-stakes situation, preparing for a licensure exam in the Philippines. Think of something like a bar exam or a medical boards, but in this case, it was the psychometrician licensure examination. These exams are super important because you need to pass them to practice your profession. The passing rates can be really variable, making them quite stressful. The researchers thought that these kinds of high-stakes exams might make people with the evaluative concerns type of perfectionism feel even more pressure. They also wanted to see if perfectionism predicted future distress. So they used a study design that looked at people over a month. So how did they do it? They got 315 people who were studying for this big exam. They measured their perfectionism at the beginning, which they called time 1, and then they measured their distress levels, like anxiety and depression, a month later at time 2. To measure perfectionism, they used a questionnaire that looked at both the personal standards PSP and the evaluative concerns ECP. For distress, they used a quick but effective screener that asks about anxiety and depression symptoms over the past 2 weeks. After collecting all the data, they crunched the numbers. They looked at the average scores, how spread out the scores were, and how the different types of perfectionism related to each other and to distress. Here is where it gets really interesting. They found that the evaluative concerns perfectionism, that fear of judgment and making mistakes, was a pretty strong predictor of higher distress, anxiety, and depression a month later. That means if you scored high on ECP, you were more likely to feel more stressed out and down later on. But, and this is a big but, the personal standards perfectionism, the part about setting high goals, didn't really seem to predict any of these negative outcomes. It was like setting high standards on their own wasn't the problem. The study then looked at the 4 groups based on the 2x2M model. Remember, we have non-perfectionists, pure PSP, pure ECP, and mixed perfectionists, who have both. When they looked at overall distress, the results were pretty clear. People with pure ECP reported much higher distress than those who weren't perfectionists. And importantly, people who had mixed perfectionism, both PSP and ECP, also reported significantly higher distress, similar to those with pure ECP. What is really fascinating is that the pure PSP group, those who just had high personal standards but weren't worried about evaluation, didn't actually show any more distress than the non-perfectionists. This suggests that just striving for excellence isn't the issue. The same pattern held true for anxiety. Pure ECP and mixed perfectionism groups experienced more anxiety than non-perfectionists and pure PSP individuals. And guess what? The same story unfolded for depression. ECP, whether it was pure ECP or mixed with PSP, was linked to higher depression. Again, PSP on its own didn't seem to make a difference. So, what does this all mean? The study strongly supports the idea that it is the fear of negative evaluation, the ECP part, that really drives distress. Having high personal standards PSP doesn't seem to cause problems on its own. And even when combined with ECP, it doesn't make things better or worse than just having ECP alone. This leads to what the researchers call the aggravating factor hypothesis. It basically means that the pressure to be perfect from external sources, like what others think, is so powerful that it just makes everything worse, regardless of whether you also have good personal standards. The researchers suggest that in the Philippines, cultural factors like strong family expectations play a big role. Passing these exams is often seen as bringing honor to the family, so the fear of disappointing parents or family members can be a huge source of stress, fueling that ECP. The paper also brings up an interesting point from newer research. Some scientists are now thinking that what we've called personal standards perfectionism might actually be more like excellencism, a healthy drive to be good at things. They argue that the positive outcomes we sometimes see with PSP might be due to this healthy drive rather than actual perfectionistic striving. This means that the tool they use to measure PSP might be capturing this healthy drive more than problematic perfectionism. So, practically speaking, what can we do with this information? For people facing big tests or any high-stakes situation, it is really important to develop healthy coping strategies, focusing on actual tasks and problem solving, rather than avoiding the stress, seems to be key. And for those who worry a lot about what others think, finding ways to manage that worry is crucial. Now, like any study, this one has its limitations. The biggest one is that they only looked at people studying for one specific exam. So, we can't be 100% sure these findings apply to everyone in every situation. Future research could look at students in regular school settings or even people in their workplaces. Also, this study focused on distress, like anxiety and depression. It would be interesting to see if the pure PSP group, the ones who just set high standards, also report higher levels of happiness or life satisfaction. In a nutshell, this study gives us a clearer picture of perfectionism, especially in tough situations. It really highlights that the pressure to be perfect because of what others might think ECP is a major source of distress, while just having high personal goals, PSP, isn't the problem, and might even be a good thing. It seems the key is to manage that fear of judgment, especially when significant life events are on the horizon. What do you guys think? Does this resonate with your own experiences with pressure and perfectionism? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science explained simply. And hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.